Are they to blame? You know, I know management didn't want me to get hurt. There is no way. In fact, I can guarantee you management didn't want to see me get hurt. That foreman I talked about, Jerry, that had to take care of me. You know, Jerry is my older brother. If there's anything he could have done, he would have did it. No, management wasn't to blame. They contributed by not making sure everybody knew those safety procedures and that making sure they were properly trained and understood that safety always came first. They weren't to blame. The next place I looked at after I looked at management is I looked at that equipment. Was that piece of equipment to blame for my accident? You know, I did some research on that equipment. I found out that equipment that I was cleaning by hand was not designed to be cleaned by hand. When it was initially put in, it had some water pipes that came down and hooked to the end of it. They would pump it full of water, turn on the steam, add some chemicals to it, and boil it out. That's the way it was designed. But about 3 years previous to me going to work there, they'd had some problems, and those pipes had started to leak and drip down. So they called in maintenance to take a look at it. When maintenance came in, they found out that those pipes had been rotted all the way from that equipment all the way back to the other end of the plant. They said, in order to fix it, we have to replace all of these pipes. But when they talked to the plant manager, they said, you know, we're shutting down in 3 weeks for summer maintenance. And if you can wait just until then and clean it by hand, we'll replace all that during the summer. So the plant manager said, fine, we can go ahead and do that. But what happened during the next 3 weeks, one of the things that they found out was it was getting cleaned better and faster when it was getting done by hand than the way it was designed. So when maintenance come back in and took a look at it and got ready for their summer and talked to the plant manager again, they sat down and decided, you know, why go through all this expense and work when it's working better like it is? It hasn't bothered anybody, nobody's complained, everything's working good, and it's faster and better than it was. So why fix it? So they didn't. They just pulled all the pipes out and left it. And we cleaned it by hand. Does that make that equipment to blame for my accident? You know, it had been cleaned that way for 3 years and hadn't bothered anybody yet. Nobody had got hurt, nobody had said anything. I've never seen equipment that was wanted to hurt somebody or designed to hurt somebody. No, that equipment wasn't to blame. But it contributed. A very strong contributor. It put me in a position I shouldn't have been in. But it wasn't to blame. The next thing I looked at after I looked at the equipment was looked at training. Was I properly trained on how to do the job? Was I trained to do it right? No. Was I trained to do it wrong? No. I just wasn't trained. Is that to blame? I mean, if I would have been trained to do it the right way, that's the way I would have done it. If I'd have been trained to lock it out, tag it out, I would have. Was training to blame? No, training wasn't to blame. I wasn't trained to do it wrong. But you know what? Training could have prevented it. If I'd have been trained to do it right, that's what I would have did. It wasn't blame, but it could have prevented it. The next thing I looked at was my coworkers, the other people that were working in the plant, the people that did that job before me. Were they to blame for my accident? You know, I came into the plant just a few days after my accident. And the first guy I ran into works at an area right down underneath it. And he came up to me and says, you know, Brad, he says, I knew somebody was going to get hurt in that. I knew one of these days somebody was going to get caught. He says, every time I seen them get up there and clean that machine, it scared the crap out of me. Because I knew one of these days it was going to get somebody. But he never reported it. He never said anything to the safety guy or the foreman or the manager. But he knew somebody would. Yeah, I talked to several guys that had got that spray nozzle caught in the machine and ripped out of their hand. I talked to 2 guys that had that green scrub pad get caught and ripped out of their hand. I even talked to one guy that came so close, he got his fingertips caught. But by some miracle, by some luck, all it did was tear up his gloves. And he was able to get out. But you know what? There was never a near miss filed. There was never any report made. Does that make them to blame? No, they're not to blame. I might have done the same thing. I don't know. But you know what? They could have prevented it. I know they could have. Like I said, I had the plant owner come to me with tears in his eyes and said, if I'd have known that's what they were doing, I would have shut it down myself. So maybe if one of those guys would have stepped up and said, hey, there's a problem here. I almost got hurt. I seen somebody almost get hurt. It would have changed. But nobody did. They're not to blame, but they could have prevented it. The last place I looked, and it was tough to do. I had to look at me. Was I to blame? Well, if I have to say it's somebody's fault, yeah, it was my fault. First of all, every person, every individual is responsible for their own safety. You are responsible for your actions. But on my behalf, I was only doing what I thought was the right way to do the job. I was trying to be that good employee. I was doing the job like I thought it needed to be done, the way I'd seen other people do the job. That's all I was doing. So yeah, maybe it was my fault, but really, am I to blame? I don't think I was. So what did I end up coming up with? Nobody's to blame for my accident? No, I like to look at it the other way and say, everybody is to blame for my accident.